All right, so cryptanalysis actually changes the course of history many times. So I wanted to give you just a few examples to show you why the cryptanalysis is important. So I will start with an example from World War I, the Zimmerman telegram. So it's a diplomatic proposal sent in 1917 from the German Empire offering a military alliance with Mexico in case US enters World War I. So it was dispatched by the Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman. This is why it is known as Zimmerman telegram, coded with diplomatic cipher 13040. Okay. In the coded ciphers, you have every word in the dictionary, and there's a code is corresponding to them, and you just replace words with those numbers. So the person you are communicating also have that code, so they decrypt it back. Direct telegraph transmission was not possible because the British had cut the German international cables at the outbreak of war. However, the USA allowed limited use of its diplomatic cables for Germany to communicate with its ambassador in Washington. And this actually cable communication was listened by British agencies. The message was delivered to the US Embassy in Berlin and then transmitted by diplomatic cable to Copenhagen and then to London for onward transmission over transatlantic cable to Washington. The Germans assumed that US cable was secure and used it extensively. So the telegram looks like this. As you can see, there are only integers. But as I mentioned, these are just represent words, and you have to have the code book for this to encrypt and decrypt back. But the thing is that British had captured documents about diplomatic cipher 13040 in Mesopotamia, so they already know which word corresponded to which. So the disclosure would expose Room 40's breaking of German codes, and also that Britain was eavesdropping on the US cable. As a cover story, the British could publicly claim that their agents had stolen the telegrams to ciphertext in Mexico. Privately, the British needed to give Americans the 13040 cipher so that the US government could independently verify the authenticity of the message with their own commercial telegraphic records. However, the Americans agreed to back the official cover story. Of course, at that time, United States was not in the war, okay? And civilians in the United States thought that the war was not about them. So although the government wanted to, be a part in the war, civilians didn't. But with this outbreak, the revelation outraged American public opinion, helped generate support for the United States declaration of war on Germany in April 1917. So this is what happens when you decrypt a simple telegram. And this is the example of how the decryption works. As you can see, there are some codes here and the German words corresponding to them. And important thing is that, for instance, the original telegram mentions the state Arizona, but of course in the German codebook, there's no word named Arizona. So instead they divide the Arizona into letter pairs because there are codes for them. So this way you decrypt it back. So if you are thinking of such a codebook wouldn't contain every word, so this is kind of tricks that you do to overcome this problem. So this is the the decrypted version. And the important thing is that because in this case Germany actually says that, for instance, an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. So if Mexico enters the war with this next to Germany, so Germany accepts that these parts of these states actually belong to Mexico. So this is why American public was outraged about this. Okay. So also give an example from World War II. Let's see the historical advancement. We had paper methods, as you have seen in the World War I. In the World War I, people were still using pen and paper methods because we didn't have computers, of course, but we didn't also have good machines to encrypt this. But in the Second World War, we had machines like Enigma because technological advancement replaced pen and paper methods with machines. Enigma is the most famous one. And people think that Germans built it just to, use it for military purposes in war. But actually, before the Second World War, Enigma was around and generally was used in military, but also in banking and so on. So you could actually go to a shop and buy an Enigma machine just before the war. An Enigma machine is an electromechanical rotor cipher machine used in 20th century in military and commercial sectors like banking. It generates a polyalphabetic substitution cipher. As you can see, it is not monoalphabetic, but polyalphabetic, which is, this is why frequency analysis does not work directly here. Cryptanalysis of Enigma by British mathematicians and cryptologists with the initial help of Polish cryptologists actually changed the course of Second World War because they were able to decrypt a lot of secret German messages, which saved a lot of lives at the end. So here's a picture from which you can find in the Wikipedia. As you can see, it is like a keyboard. It has a keyboard here, and there are rotors here, and these have positions. So those positions actually determine your secret key. So whenever you press a letter here, for instance, A, it is encrypted depending on the positions of the rotors, and the position also changes now. So once you press A, another letter appears as a ciphertext. So you keep writing your plain text, but a ciphertext is produced. And when you send the ciphertext to people you are communicating, they also change the positions of the rotors to the secret key so that they write your ciphertext but obtain the plain text back. Probably you have seen it in many movies where they encrypt and decrypt this kind of stuff. So question is how you can guess the position of the rotors, but there are of course many positions, so the exhaustive search does not work because this is polyalphabetic substitution. In the war, they updated the machines again and again because Enigma was broken. This time they turned into more technological versions. So for instance, this one, I think called SG41, replaced Enigma, and it was introduced in 1944. And even at the end of the war, British mathematicians weren't able to break this one. So at the end of the war, the messages most of the time weren't decrypted by the cryptanalysts. So how did the British actually cryptanalyze Enigma? There was a weakness, and this weakness actually probably deliberately introduced because in Enigma, a letter is never encrypted to itself. So when you press A, another letter appears. So keep pressing A 100 times, you will see different letters, but never A. So most probably this is deliberately done because just think that you are very unlucky. So you write a word in German, so you are so unlucky that all of the letters just map to themselves. So when you obtain the ciphertext, when you look at it, you will notice some German words in the ciphertext. So to prevent this, they introduce a property saying that a letter is never encrypted itself. But British cryptanalysts actually use this property as a weakness and break the cipher. So what they did was as follows. So they listened to the radio communication at the outpost towers. So they captured the ciphertext like here. But of course, initially there were some encoding problems. Polish mathematicians helped them. So now they obtained the ciphertext. And they thought that since nothing is going on at that time, they thought that maybe they are transmitting a message as nothing to report. But there's a very specific German word for this, German phrase, keine besonderen Ereignisse. In English, it is not that special, but in Turkish, we have a very similar one, asayiş berkemal. So you don't use it in daily life, but you use it in this kind of scenario. So they thought that maybe the ciphertext actually contains this phrase. So they write the phrase just below the ciphertext starting at some point and check if any letter is actually collides with the ciphertext. So if it does, recall that this cannot happen, right? Because it is designed, Enigma is designed so that a letter is never encrypted itself. So they just shift one position and check if there is any collision. They shift it, check any collision, observe collision, and so on. So when there is no collision like here, this means that maybe they really send this message as the ciphertext here. So what they do is as follows. They find a rotor position which actually sends this ciphertext to this one. Then they keep continue, decrypting the rest of the ciphertext and see if it means something meaningful in German. So this way, this is how they broke it. So Germans constantly modified their machines during the war, and their latest cipher machines eluded at the end Allied cryptologists. But as I mentioned, this actually saved a lot of lives. So at the Bletchley Park, home of the code breakers, mathematicians, cryptanalysts decrypted many German encrypted messages which helped the Allied forces on the field. So at some point, German, here you can do the, try rotor positions many times, but once they increase the key space, it becomes harder and harder to do with pen and paper methods. This is why you also need your own machines, then also a computer. So at some point, people at the Bletchley Park needed a digital computer where it wasn't invented at the time. So they actually invented a computer called Colossus computer, the first programmable electronic digital computer. So it was discovered, invented in 1943, developed by British codebreakers at Bletchley Park to cryptanalyze Lorentz cipher. Alan Turing's use of probability in cryptanalysis contributed to its design. It optically reads a paper tape and then applies programmable logical functions to the bits of the key and the ciphertext characters, counting how often the function returns false. So it really worked well, but after the war, British destroyed it because they thought that they, technologically advanced a lot, and that knowledge might be very important for other countries, so they didn't want them to capture this information, so they destroyed the machine. And it was reconstructed in 2007, and the reconstructed version is available in Bletchley Park in a museum, and you can go and see it. And here are some pictures of the real parts of the original Colossus computer. So when they were destroying, so they asked the prime minister, how should they destroy it? And they said that none of the pieces should be larger than his fist. So this is why you see small parts and so on. So there are different parts, as you can see here.